So this is the second part of displaying information using PDO. The first part, we looked at displaying modules on a form. Okay, so in other words, what we ended up with is a program that gave us a list of modules. I can choose a module, and what that then does is call something called list students, which at the time I've not written, and so that's what we're going to do now. And it passes to list students the module code. Okay, and the module code, to remind you, came from this form that we'd created, where it calls list students because that's the action on the form, and it passes module code because that's the name we gave to the select element. Because if we look at what's actually being passed, it's a module code, which is why I named that module code. So now what we've got to do is create another file, which I'm calling list student, because that was what the action was. Actually, the action wasn't. The action was list students. So I'm going to rename that. So obviously that's got to match up with what we're the form action, list students. So what's list students got to do? Well, it's got to get that, what was it, module code. Yeah, it's got to get the module code from out of the request stream. It's got to connect to the database. It's got to use the module, it's got to create an SQL statement. Create an SQL statement using the module code. Then what do we have to do? Then we have to execute that statement to get a record set back. Then we've got to loop through the record set, and then we've got to display each student, and then we've got to end the loop. Well, when we're displaying these students, how are we going to do that? Well, probably in a table. We might be able to do it inside divs or articles or sections, but let's just use a table. So we'll start a table. We might want a header row, so start a header row. We loop through the students, so when we display student in a row, I'll put end the loop. Well, we probably want to end the table. Sorry, I'm going to put that as a comment. End the table. So far so good. Let's put a bit of horizontal space there so I can see these different components. So I think that's okay. Let's just do a walkthrough, get the thing from the request stream, connect to the database, make a statement, execute the statement, display a table and a row, loop through displaying each student, end the table. Sounds like we've got a plan. So let's at least try that. There'll be glitches along the way, but we'll solve those when we get to them. So first pass is I'm going to make up a variable called module code. I think it's always a good idea that if you've got a form and it's got a field called module code spelled like that, it's spelled like that because that's the name of the field in your database table. So make that the variable. Don't sort of change the name in midstream. Now, in my form, I'm using the method get. So what that will do is put what's in the request stream into the get array. This is a built-in array in PHP called get, and it will also put it into an array called request. If I change that from method get to method post, which I should do when it's tested, because method post doesn't put something, the browser doesn't cache it, it doesn't go into the web server logs. There's various advantages to using method post. If you refresh the page, it doesn't necessarily do the edit all over again, at least not without asking. So if we use get, it goes into the get array and the request array. If we change it to post, it goes into the post array and also the request array. So to make life easier, I'm going to use request. And what's in the request? Well, it's module code spelled like that. So module code. So I'll add a bit of code later to test that it's there, but for the time being we know it is, so let's just get it out and put it into a variable. So now I'm going to connect to the database. So I'm going to require once, exactly as I did before, the file that contains my function which connects us to the database, and I'm going to now call that function and store its return value in a variable I'm calling that, and that's the name, that's my function. So that gives me a database connection. Now I'm going to create an SQL statement, so I'm going to call it SQL students, and that's going to equal something. Now I'm not just going to make that up, I'm going to go back to my nice tool. If you remember, it's an add-on in Firefox called SQLite Manager, but I've already got that open here, and we can see students. This is what I want to display. So I'm going to be able to display the student code, the forename and the surname, and I've got the module they're studying. The module that they're studying, where's it gone, is that there. So I'll copy that into the clipboard because I can use that as part of my SQL statement. So this is the data I'm going to display, but actually the module code's not there. It's because this is a many-to-many. I've got a module which has many students, and a student studies many modules. So in that case, where you have a many-to-many relationship, you break it down using normalization. So we have an intersection table that includes the key field from both participating tables, student code and module code. So this student module table contains a module and all the students on that module, or a student and all of the modules they study. So I'm going to, if I want to display student information, I'm going to need to join the student to the student module table to get that to work. So let's make up some SQL. I want to display select. I'm going to use an alias, so I'm going to pretend that X student table is actually just called S, and I want to display the student code, the surname and the forename. I'm preceding each field with its alias, which is a good practice when you're joining tables. You don't always need to do it, only if there's an ambiguous field name, but I do it all the time because it just makes life a bit easier for me. So I'm going to get that from which table? The one that's called X student, but I'm pretending that X student is called S. So by following the name of the table with an alias, then I can use that alias instead of having to prefix these field names with X student. And it's kind of easy to read, it saves a bit of typing. And that table I'm going to inner join with the table that's called X student module, my intersection table, and I'm going to call that SM, an alias of SM. So how am I going to join them? Well, on the basis of, is the way I always think of it, that the S student code equals the SM student code. In other words, the field that's common between the two. Now that in itself would show me all of the students on all the modules, but I'm only interested in this in the students who are on where the SM module code equals what I've got in my clipboard. So, and it's a string value, so I'm putting it in quotes. So I'll copy that just in case I'm lucky and it actually works. And it does, because it's displaying all of those students that are on that particular module. Let's actually, can I browse another module without losing that statement? CM401. CM401, let's try 401. Sure enough, list those students, 401. Actually, let's use that, there's a lot of students on that one. So let's copy that bit of SQL statement, and my cursor is in the right place, so I'm going to paste that in. Except I don't just want to see the students on 401. That, you know, that would only ever show me the students on one module. I've got this variable, so I'm going to use that variable instead. So I'll copy that double click there, paste that in. So now it will show me all the students where the module code in the table equals whatever that variable equals. So now I've got to execute the statement. So I'm going to make up a statement object to hold the return from calling the database object's query method. And the query method requires an SQL statement in the form of a string. Well, I've got that in my variable that's called SQL students. So $SQL students. So that gives me a record set. So now start the table. So echo table. I might normally do this in CSS, but I'll just do it here. Border equals 1, just so that we can see it. And I'll put it on the next line onto a new line, so it doesn't end up all on one line. If you watch the previous video, which obviously you need to for this to make sense, you'll know what that does. The /n puts your source onto a new line. So here I'm going to create a table header. How many rows, how many columns have I got? 1, 2, 3, student code, surname and forename. So this is the student code. Actually, I've discovered this about this, that if I delete the end one, it deletes the start one, which I guess is dead helpful, but it's not what I really wanted to do at that point, but there we go. So let's start another table, header, student code, surname, and forename. And let's put the next line on a new line, and then we're going to loop through the record set. So while that, let's put in the end brace for me, which is very good at it, but I don't want it there, I want it there, so put that in the right place. And what am I going to do? Well, I've got this record set here. This is the statement object in a way, is a kind of record set that comes back. So I'm going to pull out one of these students at a time as I loop through this record set. So the object I'm going to end up with is an individual student, and that student will equal me invoking the method of the statement object that's called fetch object. Fetch object, you can pass various arguments into it and it will do special things, but I'm not needing it to do that, so I'll just miss that out. So fetch object statement represents all of the records. Calling fetch object will fetch the first row out into this variable as an object, and it's easy dealing with objects because now I can just deal with this student. I can echo first of all. What am I going to echo? I'm going to echo a row, and my first data will be the student code. So let's put just a little marker there that will be the code, and then I want the surname, and then I want the forename, is it? Yeah. And then I'm going to end the row. So the code then will be, and I'll put this in braces to kind of enclose what is not just a simple variable, which I would normally just embed straight away, but it will be a slightly more complicated variable because it's a student object minus greater than, and its property, in other words the field from the database. So student is an object because I fetched object, so now I can refer to any field in that object by using minus greater than and its property or attribute. In the same way that here I used that object minus greater than and called its method, or this object minus greater than and called its method. So a method called query, a method called fetch object, and a property called student code, and we'll refer to them all the same way. Object minus greater than and then method or property. So following that pattern, then I've got student minus greater than surname and student minus greater than forename. Okay, end the loop, end the table, echo in the table. So actually I didn't do that here. So all of my rows would end up on the same line. So I am going to put those on a new line, and because this is a row inside the table, actually I'm going to indent those with a \T for a tab. So save that. Let's test it. Let's see how we go. I can just reload this, in fact, because list students now exists. So if I do that, then it's called list students at least now exists, but I've got an error. It's always a good idea to have errors turned on when you're testing. On my server, I've got them turned on automatically, but if you don't, you can do a command, and I think it's error reporting, and then a number. I think -1, I think lists absolutely everything, or you can use what's known as a constant, like all will show you all the errors. So if you are not seeing an error and you've got an error, then putting that in would display what I'm already seeing. So unexpected T echo. So I've put an echo somewhere, it's not expecting one. And it tries to give me a clue, expecting a comma or a semicolon, and the error is on line 28. So I'll go back to my code, and on line 28 here, it's saying that's unexpected. Well, the reason it's unexpected is on the line before it, and in actual fact my editor's trying to show me, look, it's saying expected semicolon. There was a semicolon there, so it wasn't expecting another echo, because as far as it was concerned, this line hadn't ended yet. So I put in the semicolon, save that, refresh the page, and now it's revealing another error. So line 34. You know, I really like this part of it. You know, if it was simple and straightforward, well, anyone could do it. And solving problems like this, I think, is what kind of makes programming fun to do. And I've got the same thing, look, a little red line there because I've missed out the semicolon at the end. I hope you were shouting out as I was typing it, all you people out there in video land. So refresh the page and see what happens. Hey, except now I've got this weird thing up here. Let's view source, see where that comes from. Here, look, it's gone red because the table heading I'd put an extra greater than in. So where's my table heading? There. Save again and refresh, and sure enough that works okay. So let's try a different one. Janine Lebrun. Just trying to find something that's obviously different. Janine Lebrun's in studying everyday module. Okay. Now, does this mean I've got a problem because it's not actually displaying stuff correctly, or is actually Jean Lebrun in my crummy test data on everything? Oh, okay. So it just happened that I've got some people all studying the same module. But here it shows that they're different students. Now, the various things I could do better. I could pick up that module code and make it display the name of the module that I'm talking about by making it do a quite separate query to query the module table to pull out the name of the module. That would be good. But there's a few other things that's likely to happen. What happens if I don't give a module code? Well, it's not going to list any students. What happens if I don't actually pass the module code at all? Worse still, I get an error, undefined index module code on line 12. So on line 12 is where I'm getting that out of the request stream. Well, it's not in the request stream because I've just removed it. So we should do a bit of defensive programming at the very least here. So I'm going to take that and cut it into the clipboard, and I'm going to use a function called isSet. There are a few alternative functions in PHP that you could use, but I've got into the habit of using isSet. So what I'm going to do is isSet tells you whether something, well, is set. So it looks to find out if there's one of those, and if there is, then something. So what we really want to do is do some code, and let me take a small aside here. We want to do some code where what we're saying is like a variable equals some test or other. And if that test is true, then what we want to store is some true value, you know, into that variable. Else what we want to store is some false value into that variable. Okay, that's the kind of principle of it. Well, our test is it set? Okay, so if it is set, then what we're going to store is the stuff that's in the request stream. Else what we're going to store is null. Okay, now, so this isn't finished yet, by the way, because it's not then and it's not else, but this is the structure that we're going to do. A test, if that test is true, then we'll store that, else we'll store null. And this is known as a ternary if. Ternary is spelled, by the way, ternary, like that, ternary if statement. Except it's not then, it's a question mark. And it's not else, it's a colon. And this is a structure is actually used in a lot of programming languages. It's not just PHP, it's a common structure. So this is a ternary if. If that is set, then it will store it into there, else it will store null. So let me just save that and at least show you that what happens is the error disappears. Okay, so there's two things we can now do. I mean, depending on what that data is, we could check if that's null. If it's empty because they didn't pass anything, or they didn't, you know, it was a blank value, then maybe we don't want to carry on and do any of this. So we could just go if not empty, again a really useful built-in function. If that isn't empty, then effectively we'll do all of this code down to there, and I indent all of that. So let's see what happens if I do that and refresh the page. Whoops, unexpected doodad, did I miss out? Open one pairing, close the other pairing. Missing semicolon, which didn't show up because it was the very last statement. That's interesting, isn't it? I missed out the semicolon, but it didn't give me an error because it was the very last statement. It only showed up as an error when I added the brace at the end. At least that's my theory and I'm sticking to it. Okay, so now it's not showing anything, and I could have put an else statement. Else, you know, you need to choose a module before you can show students. Except I don't want to do that. What I'm going to do, because I don't have a lot of data, I'm going to make it behave slightly differently. I am going to, I'm going to check if that thing's empty. So if empty module code, and if it is empty, then I'm going to do something. Well, it's this where clause here that's the thing, isn't it? If there's no module code, how about if I just show all of the students? That would maybe be a good thing. So if it is empty, I'm going to make up a variable that's called where clause. And if there's no module, then I'm not going to have a where clause. Okay. Else, if module code isn't empty, then I'm going to make up another where. I'm going to make up another. I'm going to give where clause a different value. I'm going to set it equal to my where clause here. So I'm going to take that bit of code, cut it out, put it in there. So I've got this variable now that's called where clause that equals that. So then at the end of this bit of my SQL statement, I'm just going to put the variable that was called where clause. So where clause will either be nothing at all, so it'll just show me everybody, or it'll be that where clause that I had before. So let's save that and reload this page, and it shows me all the students. Whereas if I add back my module code equals that, then it only shows me the students on that module. If it's a blank, it'll show me them all. If it's not there at all, it'll show me them all. Okay, so that can be quite useful. At the minute, actually, they're not in any alphabetical order, so I probably should have changed this so it uses an order by clause. The temptation is to just jump in and alter it here, but I've been here before, and you can just make changes you think are simple can end up biting you in the bum, really. So I'm going to try it here instead. Order by S dot surname, comma, S dot forename. So it'll order by the surname first, but if there's lots of people with the surname of Smith, then it'll order by the forename. Have I got the right way around? Yes, order by comes after where. So that works. So I'll take that line of code and I will put it after my where clause there, order by. Okay, so, and now I'll go back and test. So let me go back to that form, choose someone else, find students, and it shows them all. Maybe I should add to my drop down box show all students at the top. So actually I think I might do that. So on this display order form, where I have a form and a select box and I loop through showing all of the options, how about before I start that loop I add one at the beginning, which is echo /t option value equals nothing, show all students, end option. Put it onto a new line, so let's see what the result of that is. Reload the page, and right at the top is show all students, and if I choose that, it sends a blank code, and so it shows all the students. It's actually showing them all repeatedly because they're all on different modules, don't forget, which makes me think that what I should really do is only show each student once. I wonder if I can just add the word distinct there, and whether that will fit the bill. Yes, it does. So it only shows each student once rather than repeatedly, because it showed them repeatedly because they might be on more than one module. Now when you choose a module you don't notice that, but when there isn't a module you do. So it doesn't affect it when there's only one module, but when you show all students it stops the student from appearing more than once. So there you go. Really the important thing is to write your pseudocode so that you've got some idea of what's happening, an overall plan, and it will help you realize the commonality of code. Make sure you've got error reporting on so that if you do have errors that you can go to the line number and correct them, and just test and review constantly, particularly the SQL. Always check that that's working before you put it in place, because otherwise, let's say I made a mistake, let's say I just misspelled distinct and I hadn't tested it as code. Let's see what would happen. Call to a member function fetch object on a non-object. So it's kind of a bit tricky. What does that mean? Call to a member function fetch object on line 37. And apparently I'm calling fetch object on something that's not an object. So on line 37, here I am, fetch object, and I'm calling that on something that's not an object. So apparently that's not an object. Well, where did that come from? Well, it came from me executing this query. So if that's not an object, it meant that this failed in some way. And it failed because that SQL failed. And that SQL failed because of that. Now, we'll look at ways to reveal that and show errors, but for the minute, bear that in mind, that if you don't test your SQL, sometimes things happen. And then also notice this, that we're tracking an error back. If there's an error on line 37 because that's not an object, where did that come from? Well, it came from me doing that. Well, what could have failed there? Well, the most obvious thing is the SQL failed. It could be that the database connection failed, but if that had happened, surely it would have told me that that was on a non-object, because that wouldn't be an object there. So our logic is that that's probably the cause of the failure. So put that right so that we've got correct SQL and everything works correctly. Okay, over and out. I hope that was helpful. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.